I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Regional councils of governments are very much involved in grant getting and helping usually member governments implement projects that are funded either with federal, state, or local types of grants. What I'm first going to do is give you a kind of a context of what regional planning organizations are like, and then talk a little bit about our experiences and why we believe regional grant writing and regions are a place are very, very helpful, especially in today's environment for fundraising. First of all, councils of a government are actually formed voluntarily. No one is forced to be a member of a council of government, but many of us were formed almost 40, maybe even more than 40 years ago. We have served as Federal Highway Transportation Act implementers in metropolitan areas since the very early 1960s, so we are very used to using federal dollars and planning for federal dollars. We have acted as designated federal clearinghouses for review of federal assistance. Now that program is officially not required anymore in most states. However, many states still choose to have us actually sign off, if you will, on your grants. So even if you're using some other entity to write your grant, to administer your grant, it would behoove you to involve your regional planning agency or your metropolitan planning organization, have them know about it and support it because it will help your grant application. And then many of us are what is federally designated economic development district. What we do is we pull together the economic development plans in our multi-county areas. And again, many of us have been doing that since the early 1970s. So very, very important role, and I'll talk a little bit more about why it's important then to get into those planning documents. We also do project development and resource identification for most local governments within our regions. In the bi-state region, all the larger local governments are members of bi-state. We have 5 county governments members and then 43 municipalities within those areas. But we also are very, and some of you may be out there who are with small organizations, not-for-profits, or maybe local governments, and we are very used to working with someone as small, a community, a municipality as small as 100 to 300 population, all the way to municipalities or our entire region with almost 500,000. So we have quite a bit of experience. Now, because of the program areas that I just outlined to you, we have a lot of experience with working with federal and state agencies. We literally talk to some state department every single day. Probably more, bi-state has 22 staff people, and probably more than one of our staff is talking to someone. It might be the Department of Economic Opportunity, it might be the Department of Transportation, it might be the Department of Natural Resources, it could be anyone, it could be IDA, and many of my counterparts do significant housing development and environmental, the Illinois EPA, US EPA, so we know how to talk to them, we know what they're looking for. We actually do, most of my counterparts, in fact, I don't know anyone who doesn't provide direct grant writing services. Now in bi-state's case, we provide direct grant writing services to our member governments. Our board has selected to only do grant writing for local governments. However, some of my counterparts will provide services to entities that are not local governments. And we also do grant administration, and any of you who have done grant administration know that that is extremely difficult, especially in the federal arena. So because we have existed for over 40 years and received federal dollars for over 40 years, and most of our counterparts have too, we can demonstrate the capacity to meet federal guidelines. And that matters. In fact, in many grants, if you've written some recently especially, they literally ask that question. What is your capacity? What is your experience in administering federal grants? So even if you aren't able to partner with an organization like ours because of the type of grant, maybe it's a not-for-profit type of project that you're working on, then seek out a not-for-profit that has that kind of experience so that you have a stronger grant application. And lastly, and probably most importantly, and the whole reason we exist, is to act as a forum for intergovernmental cooperation, for implementation of regional services. So the whole reason our organizations began to be created in 1962 was because the federal government realized that they did not want to give federal dollars to metropolitan areas for transportation projects and have them just be divvied up among the various jurisdictions that make up that metropolitan area. Then you would not get the biggest bang for your buck. So the reason they created us was to create regional plans that identified priorities and the top projects. And they still care about that, and you see that in every grant that you write. So I'm borrowing some of the key reasons why you should regionally plan and kind of paralleling that to why you should regionally apply for grants. And I'm borrowing from the National Association of Development Organizations. One reason is to save money and to share resources. For example, the Quad City area 4 years ago applied for a Department of Justice grant to build fiber to connect all public service answering points, PSAPs, for all of our police departments. That means that then in the ground we have fiber and we have redundant communication. That could not have been done. We actually, by the way, our metropolitan area is about 300,000 population, and we have 17 contiguous local governments in that area. We have 7 or 8 PSAPs, and if any one of them had written the grant instead, they would not have gotten the money. The only reason they got that Department of Justice money is because they said they were going to join them all together. And then they worked through our organization to write the grant and to assist the actual grant receiver, which usually is one of our member governments. Lots of times we can't be the grant receiver, so that's another lesson learned is sometimes you might not be the entity that can actually receive the grant, but you will actually be doing the majority of the work. Just find someone who can support your grant and actually be the name on the dotted line. So anyway, the name on the dotted line in this case was the city of Davenport. However, they were serving as the regional sponsor for all the communities within the Quad City area. Another reason is because it has greater political clout. We go to Washington every year. I suppose many of you do too. And when we go to Washington, we have 5 or 6 top projects we communicate. And if we don't communicate with one voice, in fact, we've heard about it every once in a while, we don't communicate with one voice, you don't get funded. It causes confusion with our legislators, and they don't appreciate that, and I don't blame them for that. So we make sure that we've identified our priorities. An example of that is that we've received thus far for a new bridge we need in the Quad City areas over $85 million and over $100 million for the Rock Island Arsenal in the Quad Cities. 2 of our top projects since 1998 have not changed. We have not confused our legislators. We also can achieve economic clout. We can do regional economic development. So some top priority economic development projects can also be applied for through regional grant writing. And an example of that is we have multi-county revolving loan funds through the Economic Development Administration. Clearly, EDA would much rather give dollars to a region than to give dollars again to one county here, one county there. So when you can communicate that you'll be able to effectively administer federal dollars down locally to the streets, to the street level, to the place level, then we can achieve that clout. And then also we can solve specific problems. I know that university extensions have been working on hazard mitigation plans. So have we. We have to have those plans in place if, unfortunately, our state and our communities have future disasters. So we have to work on those specific problems together, and it's certainly important to work on those regionally. And we've also received US EPA dollars for training on air quality. flows in masses. It doesn't just stop at the border of one community to another, and so we have to work on that. Now, some lessons learned. Federal funding is not easy. If anyone tells you it's easy, you know that they have not probably written a grant or administered a grant. But just as was mentioned already today in the opening remarks, we want it back. Remember, it's our money. And if we don't get our money back, then we're doing a disservice to our not-for-profits or our local governments. The other thing is, you got to start early. Now, sometimes you don't have that opportunity. You don't know about the project and there's a 30-day turnaround. Okay, sometimes you pull it together as quickly as you can. But remember that 30-day turnaround. Remember when it was due, and if it was due October 2010, maybe it's going to be due October 2011. So prepare that information and get ready for the next grant round. Use experienced grant writers. Again, there are people out there, both for not-for-profits and for local governments, that are very experienced in writing federal grants. They know what the questions mean. And frankly, some of them are repetitive. Those of you who have written grants get frustrated because you're literally repeating yourself all the time. Well, that's the life of grant writing. But those of us who are experienced in it know what that all means and kind of know what they're looking for. Also use experienced administrators. You can get into significant trouble if you use federal dollars inappropriately. So do try to find someone who knows about the use of federal dollars. And when you have questions, call the contact and get that information from that federal agency. Don't come to the table not bringing any money with you. You better have some money with you. Usually you have to have cash. Not always. Sometimes you can use in kind. But whenever possible, you should have both. And you should communicate that. In fact, go over and above. Have the cash that they're requiring, and then say, but in addition to this, we just spent $100,000 on the preliminary engineering for this. Or we just spent $25,000 as a not-for-profit developing this background. That makes a difference in the grant application. And then finally, scan the environment for regional opportunities to encourage partnerships. The more folks you have at the table, the more you can communicate that you have various sectors at the table, public, private, not-for-profit, makes a big difference. That too was mentioned in the opening remarks. We do need to build coalitions. Again, we need to provide a unified message. If we work regionally, we know what everyone's message is, and we can talk about what our priorities should be. We can avoid overlap by talking to each other, and we can find the niches that we need. Thank you.